Right. Well, my name's Darren, and today is an important day for me, Premier Bitcoin, my first Bitcoin, because today we're announcing a new curriculum aimed at organizations. So I'd like to thank BTC Prague. Thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to present this to you today. It means a lot to us. Thanks very much. Before I dive into it, I'd just like to say a few words on my own Bitcoin education journey. I started out as an aerospace engineer and then moved into financial software. And from there, I ended up running a technology equity fund for around 15 years. And it got to the point in my own Bitcoin education, if you like, that I felt comfortable educating my network in traditional finance about Bitcoin. So what was interesting about that was that I had a fair amount of success at individual level, but trying to influence organizations as a whole was a real challenge, a real challenge. So it was interesting that 18 months ago, I got the opportunity to join a small team at Me Premier Bitcoin, team of 4, and we started thinking about what's the best way to develop a curriculum for organizations, and how would we pitch that? So before I dive into the curriculum itself, I'd like to say a few words about Me Premier Bitcoin, my first Bitcoin. It was established in El Salvador in 2021, and the mission is to develop Bitcoin educational content for students and for citizens in general. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the Bitcoin Diploma Workbook, and I'd encourage you to go onto the website and download that. That teaches you the basics of Bitcoin and sound money, and that leads to a diploma. And today, more than 30,000 of these diplomas have been issued. And this year alone, Me Premier Bitcoin aims to reach 10,000 students in El Salvador. That's either through online learning or face-to-face. So I mentioned that this is about going global with the education. So Me Premier Bitcoin supports education hubs around the world. You can see them on the map. We call these nodes, and they operate in 39 countries currently, and the plan is to reach over 50 countries by the end of 2026. So bear in mind, this all started from a standing start in 2021, so it's an incredible achievement. So let's think about Bitcoin for organizations then. When we first started thinking about this, we thought we'd just do it for business, right? We thought we'd aim it at medium-sized businesses, large, and financial institutions as well, regulated investment firms. And then when we thought about it, we thought, actually, it really applies to governments as well, at local level, at national level, government bodies, regulators, and then beyond that, what about the not-for-profit sector? So charities, NGOs, etc. So when you think about the organization, it's really any entity that handles money as part of its day-to-day operations. So I mentioned earlier about the Bitcoin Education Challenge, okay? So I'm sure we've all seen the meme of the guy on the left-hand side. He's figured it out. He gets Bitcoin, right? And he's all excited, and he wants to educate his organization, his or her organization. But the problem is the organization isn't really listening. And that might be because it can't see where Bitcoin fits in with its operations, or its views on Bitcoin might have been tainted somehow by all the myths and misconceptions that are out there that we're all familiar with. But for whatever the reason, there's this kind of virtual brick wall between the educator and the organization. It's very, very difficult to penetrate. So maybe we should have a bit of sympathy for the organization in this regard, because this was quite fun putting this slide together, actually, because this is just a sample of some of the negative headlines in the media about Bitcoin that senior executives within organizations are reading all the time. So these have all come from one particular well-known financial publication, which I won't mention because I'm not here to dunk on them, right? But what this is, in a way, it's a kind of a mirror to market opinion. And if you're skeptical about Bitcoin, which many organizations are, you're going to see these headlines coming at you every week, and it doesn't challenge your biases, it confirms them. So, and if you're already skeptical as an executive, it's going to make you feel that somehow you're being conservative and risk-averse and sensible if you're avoiding Bitcoin. So the challenge, as I mentioned, really for educators is that you end up constantly fighting the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the myths and misconceptions. So you're constantly butting up against these problems. And so when we put this curriculum together, we decided we need a different strategy. So our strategy is to ask questions. They say the most interesting people ask questions, right? So what we're doing, we're asking risk management questions of the organization. So the organization might have a conviction, not necessarily about Bitcoin, it could be about anything. And you should be able to say to them, how will you know if you are wrong? What conditions, metrics, and criteria might you be looking for that either confirms your convictions or challenges it in a significant way? And perhaps more importantly, are you missing out on opportunities as well as threats because you're not challenging yourself? So I won't dwell on this slide. I'm sure you're all familiar with what sound risk management means, and this is a textbook definition, right? It's the disciplined process of identifying, assessing, and preparing for uncertainty to protect value and seek opportunity. It's fairly standard stuff, but in plain English, what does it mean? It means accepting that we don't know what will happen, but we're preparing anyway. And that requires a certain humility and acceptance of doubt on behalf of the organization, accepting that we don't know what the future may hold. So in a Bitcoin context then, what questions should we be asking? Well, how will it impact the organization if Bitcoin becomes a global treasury reserve asset? Now, that might have been a controversial question maybe 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, but now it certainly isn't. We can certainly see now that we're on a path for Bitcoin to become a global treasury reserve asset. It's being adopted by corporations, governments are interested, including the United States, of course, and sovereign wealth funds also are interested. Beyond that, what if it becomes a widely accepted medium of exchange for goods and services? How will that impact the organization? How will it impact your business lines? What if Bitcoin becomes a settlement layer for internet-based commerce? It's possible. It could happen. We could see large contracts settled in Bitcoin. We could see major reconciliations happening in Bitcoin, on Bitcoin rails. We could see stage payments for contracts being transacted in Bitcoin. So these are just example questions for the organization. So who must answer these questions? It's the board. The board is responsible for risk management. The board of directors, in the case of a business, trustees, in the case of a pension fund or a charity. But if you're a business, or if you're a board of trustees, it's your role to steer the organization away from threats and towards opportunity. So as a business, you're the guardians of shareholder capital if you're the board, so you have a fiduciary duty to manage risk effectively on behalf of all stakeholders. So you might say, surely boards are already doing this, right? This is bread and butter. Well, we don't believe that they are. Now, I'm pointing you here to a study conducted by my colleague James Dewar, and he's looked at the whole of the FTSE 100. So the FTSE 100 is the top 100 companies on the London Stock Exchange by capitalization. So the average market cap is around 20 to 25 billion, but there are several on there that are capitalized in the hundreds of billions. So big firms, right? So what James has done is he's looked through all of the published reports and accounts for 2024, and in particular, the risk management sections within them that should identify significant strategic risks and make shareholders aware. And by the way, they have to do this by law. What James has found is that just 3 companies in the whole of the FTSE 100 identified Bitcoin or digital assets as a significant strategic risk of the kind that we're talking about today. And by the way, this report is available for download, and I'll show you how to get that at the end. So, if an organization wants to take Bitcoin seriously, what should it do? Well, the first thing it should do is to get Bitcoin on the risk register. Okay, so this table is taken from our risk module within the curriculum, and it identifies 5 key tasks that the organization must undertake around getting Bitcoin on the risk register. So the first one, fairly evident, you identify the risk and you get it on there. But the second one is absolutely crucial. That's the point where you identify the impact on the organization. The organization at this point, therefore, has to study Bitcoin. It has to understand at a fundamental level what the Bitcoin network and protocol actually is and how it works in order to apply that to the organization. Beyond that, it must evaluate those impacts. So it looks at the probability. What's the likelihood of this risk occurring? Is it low? Is it high? And then beyond that, what is the magnitude of that impact? Is it going to be low? Could it be right up to existential as far as the organization is concerned? So once you've decided that, then you have to manage the impact. You might decide, okay, we're just going to accept the risk as it is. But if it's a significant threat, you have to mitigate. You have to take steps to prepare yourself for a threat. Alternatively, what if that risk turns out to be an opportunity? There could be an opportunity to embrace or exploit or get ahead of the competition as a result. So risk management is not necessarily about looking for threats. It's also opportunities. This is very important. Finally, you rinse and repeat. You monitor the risk. You have a periodic review, and you go back over your findings in the light of potentially fresh information. So as I said, it's that second task that's absolutely critical. That's the point where the organization gets dragged down the rabbit hole itself. So we start to break down this virtual brick wall that I mentioned earlier. And what's really interesting, it's not the educator that has done it. It's the organization itself has done it by asking straightforward and sensible risk management questions. So this feels a bit like history repeating in a way when I look at Bitcoin, and I remember what happened with the internet. These are examples of brands, businesses that were laid low by a dramatic transformation in the competitive landscape, which was brought about by disruptive technology, whether that be the internet or the rise of digital media. So I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these. I won't go through them, but it's fair to say that if the organization has got itself into a position where it's struggling to catch up, it might already be too late. So at this point, I want to put a visualization together of our curriculum, just to show you what it looks like, the modules, and how it all hangs together. So we've used AI to help us draw some pictures here, so to help with that visualization. So you probably guessed at this stage that risk is at the core of what we're talking about here. And we recommend that readers of our curriculum tackle the risk module first. Risk is the beating heart of our solar system. It cannot be ignored. It's ever present. And orbiting it are the vertical markets. Okay, so we've got a few here. We've got government, professional services, not-for-profit, banking and payments, investment management, etc. So these are constantly orbiting risk. And what we try to do is try to write a module for each of these. But it's important to say that we're not being prescriptive here. We're not saying to organizations, this is what you should do. These are the answers. Organizations should know their own setup better than us. What we're trying to do is to provide a framework for the organization to come up with the answers on its own. So if we drill down to look a bit further at a particular vertical market, in this case, planet government, there are internal functions which operate around it, a bit like moons, if you like. So we've got two here, treasury, investment management, but there are more. There's human resources, there's payroll, facilities management, media, PR, etc. And again, we're trying to put a module together for each of these to help. So at the risk of maybe stretching the solar system analogy a bit too far. There's just one more level, and that's the comets. These represent the myths, the misconceptions, the excuses, if you will, the reasons why organizations are choosing to ignore Bitcoin. So we've got 3 of these as an example. No intrinsic value, it wastes energy, it's not widely used. I'm sure you've seen all these excuses before. We've identified 10 of these, and we've written a module for each of them. So let's look at what we have so far. Industry verticals then, this is what we've written. All these are available in draft. Some are in the GitHub repository already, 2 or 3 are up. But you can probably see there's more that we can add. So for instance, healthcare isn't there. Transportation isn't there. Real estate, construction. So what we're saying to people is, if you want to come and help us, if you have a particular area of expertise and you want to try to fill some of these gaps, feel free to reach out to us and I'll show you how to do that at the end. The other thing to say as well before I move on from this slide is that this is a living, breathing thing. Okay, this is never done. So what we want to do with the verticals that we've already written, we want to be able to say, let's grow, let's iterate, let's grow this curriculum as the Bitcoin economy grows, so it always stays relevant. The internal functions then, risk is obviously an internal function, but what we've done with that, we've elevated it to the core of our curriculum, and we recommend that readers tackle that first. We've got IT, treasury management, but as I said earlier, there are others like human resources and payroll, facilities management. And again, if you want to help us with those, feel free to reach out to us. Dispelling the myths. So these are the 10 excuses that I mentioned earlier that an organization might point to for not taking Bitcoin seriously. We've written a module for all of these, and this might be useful for the educator, a nice little compilation to help them push back against some of this FUD that they're constantly butting up against when they're trying to educate. Beyond that, we've written a few additional modules as well to help put a bit of color, a bit of context around all of this. So, for instance, we've got a dive into Bitcoin's technical history. We've got a look at Bitcoin's possible future, a thought experiment around that, which is quite fun. Same with Bitcoin and AI. The open ledger, that's a really interesting area as well, because as the Bitcoin economy grows, it's not widely known outside of Bitcoin circles anyway that there's this open ledger, the blockchain, with this incredible amount of data on it that we can glean and slice and dice and report on in real time. And there'll be some incredible learnings there as the Bitcoin economy grows. So, bringing this sort of back around to some kind of conclusion then, what are the questions for the organization? Well, if your organization is ignoring Bitcoin, is that a kind of a bet that Bitcoin is going to fail? Are you betting that somehow the Bitcoin network and protocol are going to fail when it shows it's giving us the impression that that's not going to happen at all? Is ignoring Bitcoin a risk that you're prepared to take? And that's an interesting one, because if it is a risk that the organization is prepared to take, then it should document it. It should get Bitcoin on the risk register and document the reasons why, the stakeholders, why Bitcoin is a risk it's not prepared to take. And then periodically, the organization can go back and review its position in the light of fresh information. Is the organization unduly certain about Bitcoin in some way? The dangers of being too certain. When I was putting this slide pack together, I was reminded of a quote by Stephen Fry. He said that one of the greatest human failings is to prefer to be right than to be effective. So a call to action then. If you want to be the Bitcoin person in your organization, the first thing you should do is to get Bitcoin on the risk register. And the reasons for that is that, well, as I said earlier, it's probably fairly obvious at this stage, ignoring emerging risk destroys shareholder value. Emerging risk comes at you fast, as Greg Foss likes to say. So with that, I'd just like to say, here's some QR code for you, so you can download some content, tell us what you think, what you'd like to see. There's a form on there if you want to help. If you're like Liam Neeson and you have a particular set of skills and you want to help us, by all means, complete the form. The FTSE 100 report that I mentioned earlier is also in the repo, so you can have a look at that. We've got about 5 or 6 modules up there already, but what we'll be doing, we'll be periodically releasing those over the next few weeks. They're all done in draft. They're just going through the design phase at the moment. So just keep an eye on the social media for announcements around that. You can follow My First Bitcoin, Me Premier Bitcoin on LinkedIn and on Twitter as well. I think it's at Me Premier Bitcoin _ on Twitter if you want to follow that. So with that, I'd just like to say thanks very much and thanks for listening.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.